Wait, so welcome to the deep dive. You guys send us the sources, right? And we jump in. And this time, we're going to try and do something pretty fascinating with photography.
Right.
And we're taking excerpts from this book on photography, right?
Yes.
And the thing that struck me right away, just glancing through this material, it's not just about taking pictures.
Right.
It's like the history of photography, the evolution of with digital technologies, social media, what does it all mean for art and memory and how we communicate even? Like, it's huge.
Well, it really kind of forces you to think about photography as being a much bigger thing than just the technical aspects of photography, which, everybody can be into the gear and
Yeah.
But this book on photography really pushes you to think about the fundamental aspect of photography as it relates to our lives.
Yeah, and one of the first things that jumped out at me, and this is kind of a cool way to start this, is this idea, right, of pictures being a confection for memory. What is the core insight there?
Well, they're talking about how we use photographs as these little perfect packages of the past. It's
Right.
attractive, easily digestible. We trust them to hold our memories safe.
Right.
But it's kind of a two-sided thing, right?
Yeah.
Because the book even goes as far to say that, if a city were lost, maybe we should destroy all the photographs.
Whoa.
Because then our minds would be free to rebuild and reimagine that lost place in a more innovative way.
It's like, it's that thought, right?
Yeah.
That, like, we might actually be, I don't know, like we might be hindering our ability to truly remember because we have this visual shortcut.
Right, exactly.
And it goes with that other idea, too, of like, I mean, we can forget where we saw an image.
Yeah.
But it can still, like, influence us, right?
Absolutely. It just speaks to how much images affect us on a subconscious level.
Yeah.
Even if we can't remember where the image came from,
Right.
it still shaped our perception and it can shape our decision making.
Right. Yeah. It's unsettling.
It is a bit, especially when you think about just how many images we see online on a daily basis.
Right.
And the influence that they have on us without us even being aware of it.
Right. Okay, so, and then kind of related to that, there's also this idea of photography being this easy way to tag beauty.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, sometimes I feel that, like, we're kind of outsourcing our appreciation for things because we can just snap a photo and then it's like, done.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's like a thing. But then it gets even more kind of weird when you think about the digital world.
Right.
Right? Because in a way, everything's super high res, backlit on our screens.
Right.
But are we losing something in the process?
Well, I think that is the argument that's being made.
Yeah.
That, in this digital realm, we might become kind of blind to these minute details while exaggerating others.
Yeah.
It talks about how, we're missing bit depth.
Oh, yeah.
In digital images.
Yeah. What is that?
Well, think of it like, like having a box of 8 crayons versus having a box of 128 crayons.
Okay.
That digital image with a higher bit depth is going to be able to show far more subtle variations
Right.
in color and in shading.
Right.
So it can lead to a much richer visual experience.
So it's like the real world is high bit depth.
Exactly. Yeah. And these digital images, while they might look sharp, they might look detailed.
Yeah.
They lack that underlying richness that you might find in a physical print or even a painting that you see with natural light.
Right.
It's a different kind of visual information that we're processing.
Okay, so here's, I think, where it gets really interesting. Because now the book turns its focus to, like, social media and why we take pictures and share them.
Right.
And it makes this pretty strong argument that social media kind of shifts our focus away from our own internal, like, drive, you know what I mean, to, like, capture something meaningful.
Right.
And instead, it becomes about what's going to get external approval.
The likes and the comments and the shares.
Yeah. So it's like, it's like that age-old thing of, like, art for art's sake versus, like, popularity.
Right.
Right.
It's it's almost like, the author's casting a suspicious eye on a lot of what's happening with photography on social media.
Right. Yeah.
That desire for external validation is overtaking the true artistic expression or even just the simple desire to document
Yeah, yeah.
our lives. And I really liked how the author said, our intentions are rarely, if ever, completely pure.
That's a good one.
Yeah. We're complex beings.
Yeah.
We're influenced by so many things, conscious, subconscious.
Yeah. And I love that idea of the tilting artworks.
Right.
Reveals this gap between what you intended and then what the final outcome was.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the title can act as punctuation to kind of resolve the piece.
Exactly.
How do you interpret that?
I just think that, it speaks to how, the creation of art is a journey.
Right.
And sometimes, that journey needs a signpost at the end.
Right.
To kind of help the viewer understand the destination.
Right.
Or at least a potential interpretation.
Right. Okay, so now let's get into some of the really, really interesting, I think, technological discussions. So the book on photography makes a pretty strong statement.
Okay.
It says that the smartphone killed art photography even more than the Instamatic.
Wow. That's saying something.
Yeah, so unpack that a little bit.
Well, yeah, because the argument is that, while the Instamatic kind of democratized snapshots, right, for families,
right,
the smartphone unleashed this absolute flood of images.
Right, selfies.
Especially selfies, yeah. So it's kind of shifted the focus even more. Everyday photography is now all about self-documentation and presentation for a social audience, as opposed to being more of a considered artistic endeavor.
Okay.
But, the book also goes on to say that, eventually artists will figure this out, right? They'll figure out how to take these selfies and transform them into what we might consider real photography.
Right. So it is optimistic. It's saying that it's just this new wave, right? This initial wave that's maybe a little bit kind of, I don't know, it hasn't really found its footing yet, right?
Yeah.
But the artist will figure it out. Okay, so this leads into this idea of photography as a hot versus cool medium.
Yeah.
So can you unpack that one a little bit for us? What's going on there?
Right. So they're drawing on Marshall McLuhan's idea of hot versus cool media.
Right.
And it's arguing that, photography fundamentally is a hot medium.
Okay.
Right? It invites a certain distance, the viewer is meant to kind of step back,
right,
absorb the details, reflect on it.
Right.
But social media, with its constant stream of images, this rapid scrolling and the demand for immediate interaction, it turns photography into a cool medium.
So,
more interactive, more fleeting, more distracting often.
Right.
And the author brings up this analogy of the collective curator.
Right.
Where popularity is what dictates what is good and what we see.
Yeah. And it's so different, right? Even if you go into a gallery,
yeah,
to experience a photograph versus just swiping through.
Absolutely, yeah. Standing before a print, fully present in that space.
Right.
Versus, passively scrolling through images on your phone. It's a completely different physical engagement.
And it's a different context too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about nostalgia. Okay, because this one, I thought this was kind of fascinating. So it's this observation, right, that many of our memories are still framed in black and white, even though we've had color technology for so long, right?
Right.
So what is that about?
It's interesting, right? It's, even, as technology evolves, we can, fade, colorize images, but there's still something about that black and white that is so powerful to us.
Right.
I think it really speaks to the enduring power that black and white has on our collective memory and our imagination.
Right.
And it kind of touches on this idea that, nostalgia isn't just one way. We can be nostalgic for the past as it was, or for a particular, representation of the past.
Right.
And black and white offers that,
Yeah, it's like a visual shorthand for history. Right. Okay, so let's talk about skill and tools.
Okay.
Because we have this really interesting discussion in this excerpt, right?
Right.
This contrast between the barrier to entry with painting.
Right.
There's a brush, some paint, that's it.
Right.
But photography is it can be pretty demanding.
Yeah.
In terms of the actual equipment and the expense and the operation of it, the mechanical operation of it.
Right. Well, and I think it gets to this point where, the author's really talking about how the definition of skill has changed when it comes to photography.
Right.
Right. Like, yeah, it's important to understand your camera.
Right.
But in this digital age, a lot of the core skills for photographers are things like filing, tagging, and file hygiene.
Right.
And, the author goes on to argue that, if you don't have that, then it's almost like those pictures become insignificant.
Right.
Because you can't find them, you can't organize them.
Right.
It's almost like it raises this question of like how much of art depends on this mastery of specific tools.
Right.
Versus other forms of expertise.
Right.
Like curation, like organization.
Yeah, and if you can't find it, it's like, does it even exist?
Right.
Right.
Almost, yeah. And it's like it's almost like a new kind of visual literacy is needed for photographers in this digital realm.
Yeah, it's almost like photographers are now librarians.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, because they have to be able to manage these huge, vast,
right.
digital archives.
Yeah. Okay. So, and this is kind of tied to that. This idea of like the artist as a packager.
Yeah.
Of ideas. Yeah. Right. Like, if you go into a gallery and there's a framed, photograph.
Yeah.
It's all like done, right? It's like the artist is saying, like, here's the thing. Here's the whole thing. I packaged it up for you. It's done. It's resolved. It's perfect. Enjoy it.
Right.
But then, like, contrast that with, billions of untagged, unorganized images.
Right.
Online. It's just raw data.
Right. It's unpackaged. It's like it's just raw information that hasn't been thought through, hasn't been processed.
Yeah. So there's that too. It's like the art, I think, is in the decision, right?
Yes.
It's the decision to like take this one image and like put a box around it and say this is it.
Right.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about the thought process then. So like when we actually take photos and then when we edit them. So the excerpt suggests that the actual act of taking the photo often lacks a thought process unless, and this is a quote, unless the thinker is not me. So what do they mean by that?
Well, I think what they're getting at is, oftentimes when we take photos, we do it impulsively, right? It's automatic.
Right.
It's without a whole lot of conscious thought.
Right. It's like a reflex almost.
Almost, yeah. It's just like, I'm here. I'm gonna take a picture.
Click,
Click. But it's in the editing process that where the me comes in.
Right.
Right. And it's in selecting. It's in cropping. It's in adjusting light, adjusting color.
Right.
So that the photographer kind of shapes that image,
right,
and kind of puts their stamp on it,
right,
like a writer, refining their prose.
Yeah. So the initial capture is kind of like kind of more like a reflex.
Yeah.
But then it's the post production.
It's in the editing.
Yeah.
That's where the art really comes out.
That's where it is. Okay. So this is a really grand assertion. This is a huge statement.
Okay.
So it's saying that photography is nearing its completion.
Whoa.
Within the limitations, right, of human vision.
Meaning,
like, there's only so much that we can see, right?
Okay.
And eventually, everything that can be seen will have been photographed.
Right.
It's like, how many photos of the Eiffel Tower can there be, right?
Yeah.
But then they're saying, like, okay, well, maybe at that point, then it becomes the role of the human to, the machines are going to be doing the photography.
Right.
But then the humans are going to be curating, right?
Identifying and selecting.
Yeah, it's like,
And cropping.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting future vision, right?
It is.
Because it's almost taking that initial, like, act of taking a picture and it's democratizing it.
Absolutely.
Totally. Right. Like, it's just the machines are going to do that. But then we come in and we say, oh, that's the one that's interesting. That's the one that's important.
Right. And it kind of speaks to how, the tool becomes irrelevant.
Right.
Right. It doesn't matter if it was a shutter,
right,
or if it was, a mouse click.
Right.
It's the end result of curation and collection.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So there's also this really, I think, interesting, this kind of I don't know, like this philosophical bent, right?
Yeah.
Of like, we use metaphors to to understand life.
Right.
So the excerpt here talks about this idea of life being like a movie projected on a screen.
Right.
Right.
But even before photography and cinema, our visual metaphors for life were things like paintings,
Right.
sculptures.
Right.
Going back even further, cave paintings,
Right.
the patterns of the stars, And photography really offered a way to escape what the author refers to as the flat land of mere illustration of reality.
Right. It was like the AR of the 19th century.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting how these visual mediums kind of inform how we experience the world, right?
Absolutely.
And speaking of how we experience the world, there's this kind of cool observation that presidents since Kennedy have become kind of like projections.
Right.
Much
more reliant on the visual.
Yeah.
On photography, on video.
Yeah.
Compared to earlier presidents who really mostly used print.
Right.
It was all about the written word.
Right. So it's it is interesting, right? Like how much visuals have taken over in politics especially.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so, and this is kind of related to what we were just talking about with photography and galleries and stuff.
Yeah.
The book makes this interesting point that looking at art has become this blur. Right. Millions of pieces of content.
Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Because the author does say that he prefers seeing photography in curated spaces.
Right.
Galleries, museums, or in books.
Yeah.
Places where the emphasis is on dedicated attention.
Right.
Going deep.
Yeah.
As opposed to just this endless scroll.
Yeah.
That social media offers.
Yeah. I get that. I mean, it's like if you're just flick, it all just becomes noise after a while, right?
Yeah.
And then nothing really stands out. It's meaningless. And there's also this point, I think this is pretty interesting, about, we develop our hearing early.
Right.
But then vision takes over.
Quickly becomes dominant.
Yeah. And we're so visual.
Absolutely.
That we develop photography
as a way of, dealing with that.
Yeah, as a way to offload.
Yeah.
Right? All this visual information.
Right, exactly.
And it's interesting, right? We don't have that for sound.
We don't.
Right. It's sound is just kind of always there. It's static.
Static.
Yeah. And it's noise.
Noise.
And the music makes that noise eventful.
Right.
Right. It's interesting. Okay, so then there's this idea of photography being a kind of a projection of understanding and belief, but there's these caveats.
Okay.
And there's this great example about somebody taking a picture of a sign, right?
Right.
Or somebody wearing a band T-shirt, right?
Right.
So the automatic assumption is that the person taking the picture is endorsing the sign.
Right. Or that they're a fan of the band.
Yeah. But that's not always the case, is it?
Well, and I think it goes to this point that the author makes that, photography in its rawest form, it simply points at things. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily convey a belief.
Right.
Or the full truth of the context.
Right.
And it's actually the lack of that information that allows the photography to become art.
Right. It's that ambiguity.
Exactly.
It opens up the possibility of interpretation.
Right.
Okay, so, and then this is a really fascinating discussion too. The interplay between physical and digital art.
Yeah.
Right. So the book is kind of suggesting that physical art now has to measure up in some ways to its digital photograph. Right. So how do you interpret that?
Well, I just think it's interesting, right? Because the digital image is so easy to share.
Right.
It has such wide reach,
right?
And it doesn't require this whole process of development,
right?
And being exhibited,
right?
So it makes sense that the digital image would become kind of the dominant way that we see art.
Why?
And the author even goes as far as to suggest that experientialism, might become the next big art movement.
Oh wow.
Because of this.
Yeah, it's you have to go and experience something to really understand it.
Yeah.
Because the photo, it just doesn't do it justice.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about privacy then, because this is a huge one.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Social photography, right? It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere.
Right.
And the book kind of makes this comparison between our expectations of privacy, right, even in public.
Right.
And then the fact that, you're constantly being photographed,
Right.
public by default, right?
Right.
Archived with metadata.
Right.
Right. It's like, is there even such a thing as privacy anymore?
And it's interesting, right? Because even though you're in a public setting,
Yeah.
there's still that underlying assumption
Yeah.
that you have a degree of privacy. And especially when other people are in that photograph with you.
Right.
It gets into this weird gray area.
Yeah. Okay, so there's this really kind of pithy statement that the excerpt makes. Photography closes the gap between perception and a representation of reality, but widens it in terms of representation of truth. What do they mean by that?
Oh, okay. So basically, photography gives us this direct and seemingly objective visual record of what was in front of the camera.
Right.
So in that sense, it appears to be bridging that gap between how we perceive something with our own eyes,
Right.
and how it can be represented visually.
Right.
But the thing is, the photographer's making choices. They're framing it.
Right.
They're choosing the timing. They're choosing, what lens to use.
Right.
And then there's the potential for manipulation after the fact.
Right.
So it's not necessarily a complete or unbiased representation
Right.
of the broader truth.
Yeah, it's like it's just a perspective.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so this is kind of more down to earth. Okay.
Exactly.
This is a really simple statement. Easy cameras don't make photography any easier.
Right.
Right.
But they're easier to use.
They're easier to use, yeah.
But it doesn't make the core challenge of taking a good picture,
Right.
easier.
Doesn't mean you're gonna have a better eye
Exactly.
for composition or anything like that.
Having a sophisticated tool
Yeah.
doesn't translate to great art.
Okay. So, and then there's this discussion too about the life cycle of new mediums. And it's really interesting, right? There's this pattern that the excerpt talks about of this like intense like usage, right?
Yeah.
In the beginning. And then there's like this zeitgeist, it's like, it's hot for a while.
Right.
But then it's not.
Yeah.
Right. So we see this with email.
Yeah.
Right. We see it with like personal websites.
Yeah.
Right. Digital photography itself, social media platforms, even specific apps. Right.
Wow.
It's like there's this rush to the new thing.
Right.
Right. And then the hype dies down.
Yeah.
And then it's just kind of like it's part of the background.